My name is Hilda, I don't learn from my mistakes, but I will do my best no matter what it takes. It's usually my fault, but I try to make it right. And I do. Most of the time.
Hey guys, happy holidays from the VC English Critiquer. Oh man, that Hilda Season 3 was just awesome. Well, the first 7 episodes were just really good, but that series finale, oh, that is easily the best Hilda installment ever, especially the third act. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but you've got to see it yourselves. Trust me, you will not be disappointed. But with that said, there is still kind of a bittersweet notion in all of this, because as satisfying as the conclusion of the series was, it's just so crazy that Hilda's adventure is, well, finally over. It's probably the craziest lack of a supernatural entity since the year Santa Claus decided to retire. Twice, in fact. Did you ever hear of that terrible year in 2006 and 1974? When Santa Claus took a holiday on the night before Christmas morn. It was the year without a Santa Claus, 'cause he felt no one gave a crap about him working his ass off throughout the year without a paycheck dropped in his lap. With an existential crisis that was more painful than ISIS, not helped by his asshole doc. He felt no one cared for him, so he said less than grim, "This year let's screw that toy delivery talk." But Mrs. Claus wouldn't hear of such, so she sent 2 loyal elves to scour the earth and find lots of worth in folks with much joy as themselves. So they searched all around in a city called Southtown and met this friendly kid who, while definitely Santa skeptical, agreed to help Santa find his id. And of course, snow always brings holiday spirit, but in this place it does not. Because the heat miser won't let his bro Snow Miser take away its climate of hot. But perhaps some compromise is where the solution lies. Maybe they can work this out. A little heat in the pool and snow for the gloomy souls to make them and Santa not pout. And such is the plot of Rankin Bass's adaptation of Phyllis McGinley's poem The Year Without a Santa Claus. What's interesting is, even though the title and the Miser Brothers' iconic song is remembered by the vast majority, the plot and characters itself are somewhat overlooked, at least by Rankin Bass standards. I mean, you don't often see Ignatius Thistlewhite featured in merchandise with the Yukon Cornelius, the Winter Warlock, or Frosty, or Jingle and Jangle in this depiction of Mrs. Claus, but it did have enough of a following to get a live-action TV remake in 2006, and a sequel in 2008 with Mickey Rooney and George Irving reprising their roles as Santa and Heat Miser. The reviews for neither were all that great, but I can't really act like the Rankin Bass version's mild obscurity is totally shocking either. So what do you say we compare it to the remake and find out if it's at least still a better movie compared to that pile of reindeer crap, or if the remake was actually a major improvement to the story that was wrongly biased as a bad live-action remake? Whether you're having a white or green Christmas, this is old versus new, The Year Without a Santa Claus. It's only fitting that we start this comparison by looking at what everyone remembers from this story, the Miser Brothers. So, will Mr. White Christmas Snow, Icicle, and 10 Below, and Mr. Green Christmas Sun, Heat Blister, and 101 leave the bigger impact on our Christmas climate in wood or live action? Let's find out with Best Miser Brothers. First of all, yes, I know I referred to these two as the villains in my Rudolph review, and for years I always assumed that they were, and the reason for why there was the threat of A Year Without a Santa Claus, you know, like maybe they kidnapped him or something, I mean, in my defense, don't these two just look like your typical Rankin Bass villains? But upon watching the special, I found that on the contrary, they're the ones who end up bringing him out of retirement. Ironic, isn't it? But okay, let's get right into them. Yeah, even though their screen time is fairly limited, these two living embodiments of cold and warm climates and sons of Mother Nature herself, no, not that one, are definitely what everyone remembers most from this special. Even those who haven't seen it are probably still familiar with these two characters and their classic song, Mr. White/Green Christmas, and they should because it's a real toe tapper.
I'm Mr. White Christmas. I'm Mr. Snow.
I'm Mr. Icicle, I'm Mr. Tenderloin.
And please know that this is the only song that the remake actually retains because, I mean, musical or not, you could not do another version of the story without this song. In all fairness, it's a pretty good rendition of it. But now let's talk about the duo themselves. Believe it or not, this one was actually a bit harder than I thought. Dick Shawn and Michael McKean both really capture Snow Miser's smug, Paul Lynch-like narcissism, and George Irving and Harvey Fierstein do well as the super hot-blooded, over-the-top Heat Miser.
They got away. They got away.
They got away! They got away!
I honestly can't decide which delivery is funnier, and the way these squabbling brothers go up against each other is just a joy to watch in both movies. But there is one noticeable difference in their portrayals. Whereas in the new, the two seem like they took pleasure in their rivalry with one another, the Miser brothers in the Rankin Bass film seemed a lot more hot-headed, pun intended, and honestly childish about it.
Hi there, Sugar Plum. How'd you make out with a hothead?
I heard that, you snowball.
Oh, my goodness. Speak of the devil. Mind your blood pressure, hotcakes. Mother warned you about that low boiling point of yours.
You think you're hot stuff just because Mother likes you best.
Boys,
What? I told you he wouldn't cooperate.
Cooperate? Surrender the North Pole you call cooperate? Got a good mind to chill your embers for you.
Oh, yeah?
all right, enough of this.
The Miser brothers in the remake were immature too, don't get me wrong, but I saw more Malcolm and Reese like teenagers arguing with them. The Rankin Bass Miser brothers honestly felt like 4-year-old girls squabbling for the last piece of candy. And yeah, funny as both of those are, the more immature depictions are naturally bound to get more laughs from most. I think this is because when you call people childish names or pick on them in a gleeful manner, it doesn't make you look as immature because it feels more sarcastic. The more feisty attitudes of the original Miser brothers made their childish fights more believable, so I just found them funnier to watch. Plus, I also liked how they seemed to have a closer bond with the Clauses. When Mrs. Claus asks Snow Miser to put a blizzard for her, he immediately asks her, "Where do you want it?" You know, before finding out it's in the south and they gotta go to Heat Miser first. We never see the Clauses asking Snow Miser about this in the new, and while both Heat Misers had grudges against the Clauses for biasing with his brother, the Rankin Bass one did seem a little more open to doing them a favor than in the new. So all things considered, it seems that the Rankin Bass Miser brothers mastered the elements of fire and ice a little better metaphorically. Point goes to the Rankin Bass version.
Cooperate. The very thought makes the blood run cold in my veins.
Yeah, well, it's enough to boil my brain cells.
What's really interesting about Rankin Bass is they always seem to create the most non-traditional Santas. Hell, the one their first review was a racist, belittling, smug asshole, and the one here is having an existential crisis. And of course there's Mrs. Claus, who, in most of Rankin Bass's specials, is just in the background. But is that the case here? Let's find out with Best Clauses! You'll note that this is not the first time either Mickey Rooney or John Goodman has played Santa. Rooney had voiced the character in Rankin Bass's origin story for the character, its first one, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, and we saw Goodman as Santa last year in my comparison of the two Rudolph movies. This is the first and only time Shirley Booth and Delta Burke have played Mrs. C, though. Anyway, unlike with the Miser brothers, this one wasn't hard. Mickey Rooney and Shirley Booth are both miles better as the Clauses. Look, I remember how well John Goodman played Santa in the Good Times Rudolph, but the idea is that Santa here is going through an existential crisis where he's borderline losing his desire to keep living.
Come on! What are you waiting for? Pull the trigger!
I said borderline losing said desire. Anyway, I didn't feel that John Goodman was particularly disheartened here. At worst, he just felt a little overworked, like we all do when we have a big job. Mickey Rooney, on the other hand, definitely felt more like someone who had lost his faith in humanity.
Nobody really cares anymore. And besides, the doctor says I'm really not up to snuff. Besides, I'm due for a holiday.
Like, compare how each one decides they're taking the year off. Rooney didn't necessarily seem like he wanted to do this, but saw no need in continuing what was the equivalent of a faithless marriage. Hell, he even seemed a little disappointed when announcing to the elves he wasn't going on the sleigh ride this year. Goodman, on the other hand, seemed enraptured by the idea of binging on milk and cookies at home and letting the world's kids go without toys. Hell, at one point he even contemplates permanently hanging up his coat and going to a retirement center for supernatural beings. So this Santa ultimately feels more like a lazy punk than someone feeling worthless in this world. Now with that said, he's not completely uncaring. He is just as determined as the original to rescue the elf duo and Vixen when they land in trouble on Earth, especially when dealing with this asshole animal control keeper.
I remember you from when you were a little boy. You never made my list.
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for that BB gun, Santa.
You'll shoot your eye out. Ouch!
Hey, at least he didn't knock him down a slide with his foot. But there is one more small nitpick I have with him, and that's while the original knew better than to flat out reveal his identity, especially to adults, this Santa is 100% blunt about looking for elves and flying reindeer and being centuries old. With elves it's a little more understandable, but with the wise and all-knowing mascot of Christmas, after him of course, seems a little odd, but again, that's not a huge deal in the long run. Oh, but you think he's got it bad? That's nothing compared to his wife. Mrs. Claus in the original was determined to make sure the world's kids got the presents they deserved, even considering doing the job herself at one point. I guess she realized that like the Warner siblings, she's... Anyway, in Rankin Bass, she's the one who sends Jingle and Jangle on their quest for Christmas spirit, and who tries to persuade the Miser brothers to compromise to allow the snowstorm Southtown needs for Christmas spirit. But in the NBC version, she does virtually nothing. She doesn't send the elves on their mission, they just go on their own, and Santa's the one who talks to the brothers, not her. I'll go more to this with the best story around, but isn't that kind of counterintuitive? The whole reason for visiting the duo was ultimately to lift his spirits, so having the guy who needs saving... yeah, again, counterintuitive, isn't it? And on top of that, Shirley Booth is so much more charming in her role. She's kind and loving like you'd expect Mrs. Claus to be, but also has a lot of spunk and moxie, and is not afraid to be blunt if it's deserved.
Here he comes now, the big ham. I hate to do this to you boys, but you leave me no choice. I'm going over your heads.
You're kidding. You wouldn't dare.
I would, and I will.
I guess Delta Burke does fine at capturing the sweet, joyful nature of Mrs. Claus, but she was honestly so irrelevant here, I almost forget she's in the movie. Oh well, at least conservatives who think wokeness is destroying the quality of Hollywood will be happy with this. So yeah, love you, John Goodman, and I'm sure you're a nice lady, Delta Burke, even if I never heard of you. But I mean, who could better capture someone feeling as small as a tiny little speck about the size of Mickey Rooney than Mickey Rooney himself? And with Shirley Booth as a more spunky and memorable Mrs. Claus, Rankin Bass takes another point here. Point goes to the Rankin Bass version.
I don't fit in anymore.
What's a family film without a bumbling comic relief duo? And ours deserve special mention as they're the ones who actually go on the expedition for the long-lost Christmas spirit in this story. So, who made for the better explorers and comic relief bringers? Let's find out with Best Elf Duo. Jingle and Jangle are the two elves who go on the quest for Christmas spirit, the bumbling idiot duo, and more or less the protagonists of the story. Even if they are a few Christmas lights short on brightness, they do have an undying loyalty to the Clauses and Christmas, and want to do everything they can to keep this from being the year without a Santa Claus. Now I bet some of you are curious about what the outcome will be. You may remember how while the Rankin Bass Rudolph did win, it wasn't by a landslide, and it's not going to be a landslide win for Rankin Bass here either. Again, I'm sorry to destroy some of your childhoods by saying this, but I just don't think the original Jingle and Jangle are that great of characters. I mean, they aren't annoying or anything, not too much anyway, but they're supposed to be the comic reliefs, and I just don't think their dialogue or antics were especially memorable.
Riding what do you call that thing anyway?
That's Vixen.
Riding a vixen the wrong way on a one-way street and wearing funny-looking suits on a Sunday.
But
tell it to the judge.
Maybe they don't like reindeer in these parts.
Must be scared to death.
I'm scared to death.
Serves you right. Bark for the Lady Rover, indeed.
I mean, their jokes are cute, sure, but I just didn't find myself laughing that hard to them. And yes, their performances are pretty goofy, but compare them to other elves from Rankin Bass Christmas specials.
What? You don't like to make toys?
No.
Why weren't you at elf practice?
Ooh, wiggle my ears and tickle my toes. Methinks I see a baby's nose. It's more than a nose. There's a whole baby attached to it.
Yeah, wee bit of a step down. The duo in the remake, played by Eddie Griffin and Ethan Suplee, actually are a bit more developed in this version, namely how they want to see the world outside the North Pole, mostly because of its pop culture. Hell, what motivates Jangle to go on the quest for Christmas spirit is watching a female Dr. Phil knockoff on TV. But come on, forced pop culture references couldn't possibly be better than what the original offers us, could they? Well, they could if they're funny, and I have to admit, I do remember a lot more lines from these two than the Rankin Bass film, pop culture or not.
Makes me miss my mother and father.
They live right next door to you.
Oh, yeah. I always wondered who those black people were next door.
What makes you think we're gonna find them here?
Because this is a school. This is where kids hang out all day. You never seen South Park?
Well, how long do they keep them here?
About 7 hours.
Really? What do they pay them for going to school?
Nothing. Not a dime.
Well, no wonder there's no Christmas spirit.
But I only believe in things I can see and touch.
Really? Can you see a sunset, touch a puppy?
Yeah, I can see a sunset and touch a puppy.
Bad example. We really are a couple of ETs that came phone home.
ETs?
Elf types.
See, pop culture references can work if they're executed the right way. On top of that, while these two are still pretty dumb, they are a little more effective at their job than in the original. Like, the reason they're wearing those radical dude clothes is to not be conspicuous and blend in with the civilians. Although that still doesn't explain why they're so verbally blunt about being elves with everyone they come across. And while the original two failed miserably at convincing Iggy they were elves, these ones actually do succeed by showing him Vixen can fly. Only it takes them quite a bit of time to think of that. Well, better late than never, I guess. The original two did have the advantage that they actually partake in the iconic Miser Brothers scene, whereas the NBC versions do not. But overall, I just feel these two were better at their jobs of resurrecting Christmas spirit and being comic reliefs. So, as much as I hate to remember that Rankin Bass wasn't 100% flawless, I do have to give NBC a Christmas present with this point. Point goes the NBC version.
This is serious.
Boy, it's worse than I thought.
Can't you see it's gonna be a merry, merry Christmas? A merry, merry Christmas.
But of course, Mrs. Claus, Jingle and Jangle, and the Miser Brothers couldn't restore Santa's faith in humanity all by themselves. Just 95% of it. So let's see who contributed to the remaining 5% better with Best Supporting Cast. Rankin Bass, creators and the most beloved side characters in holiday media, especially in their first film, Rudolph. Unfortunately, that cannot be said for this film in either version. Yeah, I'm sorry, but neither film has that great of a supporting cast. With the exception of Ignatius Thistlewhite, or Iggy for short, the side characters do virtually nothing to further the story, and I honestly think that's a part of why the special isn't as popular as most other Rankin Bass works. The side characters are a big part of what makes their works Christmas-time staples. Was it because most of them are townsfolk, so you didn't think toys of them would be marketable, so you didn't bother giving them much personality? You know, a great character doesn't necessarily have to have merchandise. I'm sure just about any business executive would disagree with my notion, but I still stand by that. Well, I guess we'll have to make the best of what we got, and I actually think that the remake has the slight advantage with the supporting cast. Even if they don't do any more to advance the story, they do at least have a little more personality. Well, at least most of them do. The elf doctor who plays a large part in Santa's retirement decision is much nastier in the Rankin Bass version, almost feeling like he wants to drive the old man to suicide.
Nobody cares about Christmas anymore.
They don't?
Of course not. Wouldn't surprise me none if nobody even believes in you anymore.
Now, Santa, don't you pay him any mind.
Nobody cares a hoot and holler, for you are Christmas. Oh, by the way, Merry Christmas to you.
The NBC one is pretty run-of-the-mill, but okay, what is the personality that NBC gives the side characters in this version? Mostly cliches, to be honest. Like, Iggy's dad and the mayor are combined into one character in this version, which leads to a dad's too busy for kid cliche, and this leads to his mom becoming the "daddy loves you, he's just super busy right now" mom cliche. I know it's been overdone, but in the original, neither the parents nor the mayor had any personality at all, so it's still better than nothing. Well, save for a fairly sweet song about the dad having a nostalgic trip back to his memories of Santa. Plus, while the side characters in the remake don't really forward the plot much more in this version, they do still make for some fun gags.
Using the Bosworth box, create a production possibility graph displaying how Christmas affects the economy. Answer the question. Do you think this Christmas will be more or less profitable than last year's?
I think I just saw a flying reindeer.
That just earned you an extra homework assignment. Write an essay explaining why it is aerodynamically impossible for a reindeer to fly.
Drinking on the job, eh?
Not good.
Hey! You two have permission to be here? Hey, stranger danger! Stranger danger!
You're a Greek goddess, aren't you?
Isn't that a salad dressing?
Shut up.
Tried to hide my radiance under these sporty ensembles, but sometimes it just shines through.
Tonak's so surprised by that last scene. I don't know if strange men approaching kids at school, kids giving them their names, or their parents inviting them into their homes was acceptable in the 1920s, but definitely non-2006. Hence why Iggy has to keep the North Pole visitors a secret from his family in this version. And these lines don't help their case much.
I guess we'll have to keep hammering away at Iggy until he sees the magic of Christmas is real. Trying to make booty calls on the clock, that's too much booty.
This version also has a subplot where part of Santa's loss in Christmas spirit is due to his workshop getting a corporate makeover to stay trendy and suck up to the market. That makes them a grand total of $0.00. Well, that's beside the point, and the main culprit for this is a hotshot corporate elf named Sparky, who even wants to go as far as have Christmas not just be on the 25th, because yeah, we know how well that always goes in media, and even insists on doing the job himself in the third act, since apparently the North Pole laws dictate that the CEO has the right to determine who goes on the Christmas ride in Santa's absence.
That would be me.
He gets thwarted pretty quickly, but it does give the story kind of a villain, so kudos for that. And I'm just going to say it, while the original had the better Miser Brothers, Mother Nature herself is so much more funny in the remake, basically being this cold-blooded Swedish Jennifer Tilly.
And I didn't see anything.
Do not lie to Mother Nature. It makes her ever so sour.
Jingle and jangle, they mean well, but well, they're like children.
I know all about idiot children. I have some manure that needs manipulating. So unless you two boys want the job, behave!
And last, but certainly not least, let's talk about Iggy. Sure, he's a bit more cocky about not believing the do or else than he should have, but once he learns the truth, he does prove himself to be a pretty caring kid. But based on the trend here, I think I'll give a slight edge to NBC. He's presented like a corporate child prodigy who was apparently able to organize the Southtown Winter Festival largely by himself. That's pretty impressive. And this does fit his role as a grown-up kid who's adamant about not believing in Santa more, but more importantly, they just give him so much more to do. We see him interacting with Jingle and Jangle a lot more, and he's actually the one who persuades the animal control person to let Vixen go without them paying the fine, mostly using his mayor's kid charismatic smooth talking.
Iggy, you're a genius!
How'd you do it?
Politics is the art of the possible. But when that guy finds out he's not really invited to Christmas dinner...
Don't worry about it, it'll all be worth it.
The one in the original is pretty good too, don't get me wrong. Like, it was sweet how he decided he didn't need physical proof to believe in Santa if his parents could, and he actually goes with Mrs. Claus on the visit to the Miser Brothers. But then again, he was really just there in said scene. Now in the next round, I'll talk about one big difference with the original Iggy that greatly impacted the story. But since the new Iggy contributed to the story throughout, I do think I have to give him and the remake supporting cast this point. Point goes the NBC version.
Why should I be upset?
Yeah, what's the big deal?
By the way, is that the voice for Kieran from Frosty the Snowman? Let me know in the comments.
Can't you see it's gonna be a merry, merry Christmas? A merry, merry Christmas.
Now that the score's all tied up, there's really no point in doing a best story round because most of the differences with the two stories I've already talked about with the character rounds. The only thing I really have left to talk about is the ending. Which film saw that there was no year without a Santa Claus in a more triumphant way? Let's find out with Best Ending for the win. So I bet a lot of you are really curious about what the outcome's going to be. When I watched these movies for the first time, I naturally assumed the original would be a moving holiday classic on par with Rudolph that I had the misfortune of not growing up with, and the remake would just be another one of those shallow cash grab live action remakes that's become a staple with Disney today. But I found neither of those were the case, as I didn't think either film was really awesome or terrible. Again, I think what kept this particular work from being more higher ranked was its underwhelming supporting cast. As great as the Miser brothers and Clauses were, they ironically have less screen time than most of the side characters, so this kept the special from being among Rankin Bass's most charming works. The remake may have had weaker portrayals of the most iconic characters, but since it did give the side characters who have the majority of screen time a slight upgrade, that does give it a slight advantage in that field. So does that mean it's a tie? Nope. Because there's still the ending to take into consideration, which are fairly different each film, but still aim for an emotional vibe, and Rankin Bass's is 100 times more effective. How so? Well, in the remake, what ultimately brings Santa out of retirement is seeing how Iggy is still optimistic even without his dad who never has time for him. So he figures, if this kid can be positive, so can I. So what about the whole make it snow in Southtown to show him there's still Christmas spirit? Here Santa only does it because Iggy wanted it for Christmas, and when it does, and his dad comes home and sees how happy they all are, he makes the usual family's more important, I resign as mayor speech we've seen all the time in the media. We get a montage of them bonding at home, and after Sparky is put in his place at the pole, we actually see the impact of Heat Miser making the pole warm for a day. Yeah, you kind of see the problems here. Santa bucks up way too quickly and over a relatively trivial thing, and the whole big snowstorm conflict feels pretty undermined since it's not done to lift his spirit. I wouldn't have necessarily minded the whole family means more to me speech cliche, how they kept it alongside the original film's ending, but we've seen it in media way too many times to count, so on its own, it doesn't do much for me. I did like how we saw the impact of the heated North Pole though. Anyway, now let's look at the original film's ending. So the snow comes, spirits come to Southtown, and now the general public accepts that Santa Claus is real. Yeah, one thing that confused me is, even though both films seem set in universes where Santa exists but is still acknowledged by the general public as just a fairy tale, yet they still don't question where the presents they don't buy for their kids under the tree come from, the newspapers at the beginning frickin' announce Santa's retirement. Hell, Iggy literally says 1 minute that he's heard about Santa retiring in the papers, and the next says he doesn't believe in him. The remake is a bit more consistent by dropping the whole news announcements of Santa's retirement, and when Iggy's parents claim they still believe in Santa Claus, it's more like a, he's real in a different sort of way, just like love is. You know, kind of like how most parents try to break it to their kids that... Well, anyway, my point is that everyone now believes in Santa, and have decided to bring him Christmas presents for a change this year, and Santa does agree that he was wrong, and the world really does love him after all. Enough to let him take the year off from delivering gifts. But even though it seems like Mrs. Claus's efforts were all for nothing, Iggy and all of the world's kids still make good on their promise to give Christmas presents to Santa this year, or cards if they don't have enough money. And one card contains a cover of an Elvis Presley song that, with Rankin Bass's Pixar-level talent at making emotional and moving scenes, opens his eyes to just how really important he is to children. I still think Frosty melting is the most emotional Rankin Bass scene ever, but this honestly is a close second. The kid seeing this completely makes you believe her devastation about Santa not coming this Christmas, and the cute composite shots of the puppet and the kid's drawings add some corny charm that overall lead to a really sweet and heartfelt, but also very emotional moment that honestly deserves a lot more pop culture references than it currently has. Now, doesn't that seem like a much more engaging way to help Santa see the light? So naturally, I was pretty disappointed that the remake chose to completely forgo this ending and just rely on an overdone cliche for its big heartfelt moment. And again, if it had this ending on top of it, it wouldn't have been such a big deal, but on its own, yeah, I've seen this way too many times to feel any emotion. But the bigger question is, why did they change it to begin with? Did they think it'd be too corny for the general public to decide they believe in Santa Claus in a live-action film? It seemed to work fine in Will Ferrell's Elf. But you know what my biggest takeaway was? A lot of people think it's wrong to lie to children about Santa, but this scene helped me realize that, real or not, Santa really is a big part of children's Christmas. It's sweet to think that someone actually is willing to spend a whole year making presents for kids for no money whatsoever. I think this motivates a lot of kids to be more thoughtful around this time of year to each other, just like Santa is to them. I tell ya, Rankin Bass is just so ingenious about sneaking messages for the parents in its specials. So overall, I did enjoy both movies alright, and while I don't think either will leave nearly as big of an impact as Rudolph, they're both still pretty fun stories in their own ways. But the ending of the Rankin Bass film is what ultimately made me realize why it became the holiday classic. Because without the concept of Santa for kids, they'll definitely have Point goes to the Rankin Bass version, the ultimately more satisfying prevention of a year without a Santa Claus.
What am I, chop suey?
And that's all I got for the year without a Santa Claus. Now, I know that some of you guys were expecting a collaboration between Murray and I after this video, but it's been slightly delayed because I simply have to do a video analyzing the even better than Disney Renaissance awesomeness of Hilda Season 3. But I won't deprive you guys of the tradition we have of playing my all-time favorite Hilda song when I make an announcement of said collaboration. So...
True, exotic or nautical, fun, my aquatic dramatics are second to none. I'll give you everything if you just give me your applause. You're in luck, cause you're stuck.
Gotcha! That's my new favorite Hilda song. Come on guys, did you really think I would risk Murray sending those Teletubbies after me? Well, see ya then guys, and have a Merry Christmas.